David had a dream to build a great house, not for himself or his family, but for God, a house of worship where God's presence would dwell forever. He poured his heart out to God, asking for permission to start the project. But God answered with a surprising no. And to make matters worse, God didn't just say no, but gave reasons why David wasn't qualified to do the job. Was David disappointed? You bet. I mean, who wouldn't be if they worked so hard for something only to be told they couldn't have it? But David's reaction teaches us a lot about faith and how we should respond when things don't go our way. Let's dive into what went down in 2 Samuel chapter 7. Imagine being David. You've just made Jerusalem your capital city, and things are going great. Your kingdom is stable, your family is safe, and your people are happy. But you can't shake this feeling that something's missing. As you walk around your fancy palace, you think about the Ark of the Covenant, the box that holds the 10 Commandments, the symbol of God's presence among his people, and it's sitting in a tent, a temporary tent. Now, you might be thinking, big deal, it's just a tent. But to them, it was a big deal. It showed that God was with them wherever they went. But now that God's presence was in Jerusalem, in a place that would be their home forever, shouldn't he have a more permanent living space? That's when David has an idea. He wants to build a proper house, a temple for God. So he calls over his favorite prophet, Nathan, and lays out his plans. He says, "Here's what I want to do, Nathan. Do you think God would be happy with this?" And Nathan, being a good friend and probably assuming David will listen to him if he says yes, tells him, "Sure, go for it." But then something strange happens. That night, God talks to Nathan and tells him, "Tell David I spoke to you." And Nathan's like, what did you say?" So God repeats himself, and Nathan heads over to David to deliver the message. He tells David, God says, "Are you the guy I want to build me a house?" Think about it. How long have we been a people? For 400 years wandering in the desert, then 200 years in Canaan. And do you think I said to any of the leaders I put in charge of my people, "Hey, build me a nice house out of cedar"? And the answer is no, because God never asked anyone to build him a house before. Now, why is that important? Well, building a house for God was a big deal. It was an honor, but also a huge responsibility. Back in those days, kings were considered God's representatives on earth, like a CEO of a company. They didn't have presidents. They had kings, and these kings were expected to act in a way that honored God. If you think about it, the king's palace was kind of like God's office, and when the king built his palace, he usually threw in a small shrine for God, like a little break room shrine. So when David came along and wanted to build a separate house for God, that was a clear sign that he was serious about his faith. But God was throwing some serious shade David's way, and David wasn't perfect. He'd done some pretty shady things to become king, like murder and adultery. But hey, everyone has their past, right? But here's the thing, David was known for being a man after God's own heart, someone who loved God with all his heart, soul, strength, and mind. So when God told him no, that really hurt. I mean, imagine being known as the best singer-songwriter in the world and suddenly being told you're tone deaf. That would crush most people, but not David. David didn't argue with God. He didn't complain or get angry. Instead, he listened, accepted God's decision, and decided to follow God's path instead of his own. So what does this teach us? First off, God doesn't owe us explanations. Imagine you're a kid asking your parents for a pony for your birthday. You've saved up all your allowance, made a budget, and even picked out the perfect one. Then your parents come back with, "Sorry, we can't afford it." Do you throw a tantrum, or do you accept their decision? Being a kid, you're allowed to throw a tantrum, but that won't change their decision. Growing up means accepting that sometimes we don't get the answers we want. Second, God's ways are higher than ours. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper. With Legos, you'd need a lot of blocks and a lot of patience. But even if you spent years on it, it wouldn't last very long. That's because real buildings are built with different materials and designs that can withstand weather, earthquakes, and time. Similarly, God has a bigger vision for David's descendants and their relationship with him. He wants something that's not just a building, but an everlasting kingdom. Third, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. When God chose David to be king, he didn't look at how qualified he was. He saw the potential in him. Same goes for building the temple. Maybe David wasn't qualified, but he chose him anyway because he knew what he wanted David to learn through the process. Fourth, when God says no, there's always a better yes waiting. Think about it. If David had gotten his way and built the temple, he would have missed out on the opportunity to know that God's presence was untied to a building. Remember when Jesus taught about prayer in Matthew 6, he told his followers not to pile on empty prayers in synagogues or on street corners, hoping to be seen by others. Instead, he suggested going into a room alone to pray, showing that true worship isn't about impressing others or being seen. It's about connecting with God on a personal level. Fifth, when God closes one door, he opens another. David couldn't build the temple, but God promised that one of his sons would, and that son was Solomon, the wisest king in history. He built the temple and became famous for his wisdom and wealth. Now, what does this mean for us today? Well, maybe you've prayed for something for a long time, but haven't received an answer yet. Or maybe you've heard a no when you wanted a yes. It's important to remember that God's ways aren't our ways. He has a bigger plan for us, even if we don't see it yet. As Christians, we're called to trust in God's plan, even when we don't understand it. It's easy to think that we're in control and that our dreams and goals are in our hands. But the truth is, our lives are in God's hands. He's the potter, and we're the clay. We can resist God's plan or try to change his mind, but that rarely works. Most of the time, the best thing to do is to trust in God's goodness and wisdom and let him guide our steps. Think of the Israelites who followed God out of Egypt. They faced danger at every turn, but God guided them through the Red Sea, provided food and water in the desert, and led them to the promised land. Even when they complained and doubted, God didn't give up on them. He kept his promises. Similarly, when we trust in God's plan, he helps us overcome challenges, provides for our needs, and leads us toward our destinies. This can be tough, though, especially when we're facing hard times. It's easy to lose faith and wonder, what's the point? But the Israelites learned that trusting God paid off in the end. They inherited the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as God promised. And we too can inherit blessings beyond our wildest dreams if we trust in God's plan. But remember, trusting in God's plan doesn't mean we stop praying. It just means we accept that our prayers may not always be answered the way we want. Keep praying, keep believing, and trust that God has a purpose for everything that happens in our lives. In David's case, he couldn't build the temple, but his son Solomon did. And that led to an entire dynasty of worship in the temple, which led to Jesus Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promises. Who knows what doors God might open for you if you're willing to trust in his plan? So what do you want to ask God about? Leave your thoughts below and let's talk about it. And remember, keep believing and stay curious. Thanks for watching and see you next time.
Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell icon, and join our growing family as we discover the Bible together every week.